with the threat of fascism, with international oppression. And George Lansbury, of course, was a noted pacifist and Christian pacifist. And what I wanted to, and I'm sure there are people who will know the answer to this, so I'm going to ask the question, and maybe someone will tell me when we're discussing it. But I would love to know what George Lansbury's attitude to the Spanish Civil War was. Did he oppose the volunteers who went to fight against the fascism and for the democratically elected republic and with its socialist agenda? Did he oppose them, or would he have supported them? And what would he do, for example, now when clearly, the broad answer is you need you need respect for international law, you need the rule of international law. You need all nations to subscribe to the United Nations Charter, to respect international law, respect the Geneva Convention, and intervention needs to be from the United Nations only. But in the absence of that, what would his attitude be, I wonder, to the oppression of the Palestinians by Israel? How would he deal with it? Because that's a knotty question. And it was particularly brought home to me just recently because I was involved in the Russell Tribunal on Palestine with reference to Gaza, the appalling, shocking, murderous activity that went on in Gaza this summer. The question is, how do you deal with that oppression? Because plainly the Palestinians are an oppressed people. When the politicians as a whole pretend it's not happening, and we stand by while the international law is broken, while the Geneva Convention is broken, and we invite Israel to, we have arms trades, we have arms deals, we have special trade agreements, and we suddenly discover Israel is part of Europe. When in the football matches, suddenly the boundaries are redrawn. No Palestinians, of course, but Israel is part of the European footballing tournaments, and even worse, it's in the Eurovision Song Contest. I think most countries should vote to leave it, but nevertheless, there's Israel, despite having absolute contempt for international law, the Geneva Convention, and yet we tolerate. What does civil society do in those circumstances? I think there's a big question to deal with there. But the main point I wanted to come to, if there's time, was a decision that faced George Lansbury right at the start of his political career. And it was this. George Lansbury started as a Liberal. And he stayed in the Liberal Party for a time. He acted, as I believe, as an agent for a Liberal candidate. And then he realised that the Liberal Party would not represent the interests of the working class. And he left. Well, that's an issue I think is facing us. He said, sorry, the lights are a bit different here from poor eyesight. He said that liberalism would progress only as far as the great money bags of capitalism would allow it to progress. Liberalism. And then he left and he tried to find a path through different left groups, the Social Democratic Federation, and ended with the Independent Labour Party, with its mixture of Marxists and Social Democrats, and became part of the Labour Party, and in the end was led by Ramsay MacDonald, who, towards the end of his career, joined up with the Tories. So it was a very mixed bag, and it's a mixed bag in a way that we have now. When you look at the political scene, we have different left groups. We have the Labour Party, and we have the Greens, and we have Social Democrats, and we have some Marxists, and we have fragmented groups, and we have sectarianism, we have all the problems that George Lansbury faced over a century ago, and it seems sometimes that we've barely moved on. But the question is, are we at a similar point? Are we at the point of being in a party or seeing that the mass party that claims to represent the interests of ordinary people no longer doing that and having no possibility to do that. And that's, I think, is the big question we're faced with. Labour has always been a social democrat party, based on the mixed economy, part public, part private. And its high point was 1945, when it took into public ownership the utilities, gas, electric, water. We owned that. Hard to imagine it now, but we owned it. We owned the transport system. We built the health service. We owned the mines. We owned the steel industry at some point. We owned all that. But when you look at it, the Labour Party did not, that's where it stopped. There was no attempt to fundamentally transform the nature of the economy, to make it a workers' republic, as it were. There were public ownership of the main industries with democratic control. It was never that. It was the infrastructure in which capitalism could then regenerate itself. And of course it was the high point of social democracy, and there were many great achievements, and people are spending their time now trying to defend them, particularly the health service, as it's falling apart beneath us. But it was the high point, and we've never attained anything since on that scale. But now, it seems to me there is no social democracy. There is no mixed economy. Everything is to be privatised. Everything. The health service is now open to the private providers. We briefly held the northeastern train line. It's now today going to be privatised yet again. Royal Mail was privatised. And when the Labour Party was asked for its opinion, I guess you will remember what it said. The spokesman said, "We have no ideological objection to Royal Mail being privatised." What they argued over was the price. The price, not the principle. And it was the same with Eurostar, again, which happened just recently. No disputes from the Labour Party over privatising Eurostar. It's making a profit for us that can benefit us, can go into our public services. What will the Labour Party do? Nothing. We'll leave it to the private companies. And so the Labour Party is now the party of business. And when, in 1997, when Tony Blair said Labour means business, the more naive people thought, well, Labour's going to roll up its sleeves and get down to do some work. No, not at all. He meant Labour means business. He meant Labour means business. He meant Labour identifies the way this country should progress is when the interests of business are satisfied. And that's the fault at the heart of social democracy. That the employer has to make a profit before you can defend your job, before you can ask for a wage rise, before you can defend your conditions, before you can keep the factory or the business or the service open, the employer has to make a profit. And what does the employer need to make a profit? Well, the employer needs cheap raw materials. The employer needs to reduce the cost of labour. The employer needs to increase his market share and sell as much as he can. Now, those are imperatives that every employer must abide by. They're not the system failing. That's the system working. That's the system working. When the employer cuts the workforce, that's the system working, because he has to cut his labour costs, because his obligation is to the shareholders, not to the community. And when Ed Miliband talks about responsible capitalism, it's a joke. If he means responsible to the community, it's a joke, because he knows capitalism is responsible to the shareholders first, last, and in between. And anything that we've got has been gained in the teeth of those imperatives. And now capitalism has developed to such an extent that it is war between the big corporations. So it is Aviva or Transco or G4S or whatever the Capita or Richard Branson. Why should Richard Branson have to make money out of our health service? I mean, ages ago, somebody told me that in Devon, the child services, the child care services are run by Virgin. Why should Richard Branson have to make money for us to take care of our children? Why should we make profits to go to tax exile in the Bahamas so that we can look after our children? But that's the world that New Labour now supports. Because it's only a question of price, it's not a question of principle. And that's why, in the end, that I think we have to, my answer to my own question is yes, it is time. It's time. Lenin, everybody will know this quotation, I'm sure. Lenin supported me, words to the effect, we support the Labour Party like a rope supports a hanged man. Time to cut the rope, let the corpse fall. Because across the country, people are leaving the Labour Party, aren't they? We know that. They're leaving. They've gone to the SNP in Scotland, and bizarrely and ironically, they've gone to UKIP, or going to UKIP here, a party which stands against everything the working class people interest they have. Cutting taxes for the rich, privatising even further, cutting benefits. Everything that will do damage to ordinary people, UKIP will do. They are Tories. Supported by Tory money. They are Tories. Winding up our fear of immigrants. Very dangerous. So we need political representation. We have a problem of political representation. And people here will know the problems people have. I mean, there was something just sent me a story today. I was just going to read it to you. I mean, it's too long to read the whole thing. Essentially, it's a man whose benefits were stopped. He was sick. He had epilepsy. He'd always had epilepsy. He couldn't work. He was receiving capacity benefits. This has just happened. His benefits were stopped. He committed suicide, hanged himself. It's in Sunderland. It's in the paper just today. I read it today. Just hanged himself. I'm from the Midlands, town in the Midlands. I went there 2 days ago. I met a young man there. He was getting charity housing. He was trying to work, looking for jobs. He was not on benefits because the humiliation of it, that he'd been sanctioned, he wasn't on benefits. He was in charity housing. It was a detention room. I mean, it was just unbelievable. There was nothing in the room. He got a second-hand fridge in the corner, immaculately clean. The friend I was with said, can we be cheeky and ask you what's in the fridge? And the lad was very embarrassed. He said, yeah, okay. So he opened the door. There was nothing. Not a thing in that fridge. Not milk, not a slice of bread, nothing. And we said, have you ever been hungry? He said, yes. He said, what's the longest time you were hungry? He said, last week, 3 days. Didn't eat for 3 days. It was comparatively warm weather, so we got no heating on. He said, well, we agreed when the heating comes, obviously that's much worse. When the winter comes, that's obviously much worse, because there'll be no chance of, it's either heat or eat. Story the other day of a mother of a disabled child, £20 on the bedroom tax taken from her benefits. She's having to sell whatever she's got in order to buy a winter coat for the disabled child. The lad we heard who was working for getting agency work, again not on benefits, because he was getting agency work, and sometimes he was getting 20 hours of work, sometimes very little. No time to regenerate his application for the agency, for the benefits. So he went he got a call, 5 o'clock in the morning, be at a warehouse at 6 o'clock in the morning. He got there, it was the other side of town. He got there 6 o'clock somehow. 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:15 came. The foreman came in and said, who are you, what do you want? He gave his name. He said, what are you here for? He said, well, I've got a 12-hour shift. He said, no, you have no work today. It's like the dockers used to be on the cobbles, scrambling for work to get their book accepted by the boss. That's what we've allowed to happen. That's started to happen under the last Labour government. So I think it's time we start again. If we don't, who will? If not us, who? And if not now, when?